Make holiday gatherings more delicious at Whole Foods Market. Whether you're the host or the guest who aims to impress, save now on baking essentials from 365 by Whole Foods Market. Need some extra help? Pick up crowd-pleasing flatbreads that are ready to heat, or build a lovely charcuterie board with sales on specialty cheeses and meats. Holiday wines and beers are also on sale, starting at $7.99. Host the perfect holiday party with Whole Foods Market. Must be 21 plus. Please drink responsibly.
This episode is brought to you by Seed. Seed's DSO1 is a 2-in-1 probiotic and prebiotic designed for whole body health. Formulated with 24 clinically and scientifically studied strains, DSO1 offers benefits in and beyond the gut. See why DSO1 is the probiotic recommended by top doctors and nutritionists. Go to seed.com/Spotify for 25% off Seed's DSO1 Daily Symbiotic.
Thanks for choosing this free Anfield Index podcast. If you'd prefer to listen to this or any of our other shows without adverts, then now's the time to check out Anfield Index Pro. With AI Pro, you can supercharge your entire listening experience. You'll not only get all of our podcasts without the ads, but you'll have them far faster with our Quick Publish feature available exclusively for subscribers. AI Pro also puts you in the heart of our sound studio, with an option to listen to many of our shows live and interact with the podcasters in real time as the shows are recording. Upgrading couldn't be easier. AI Pro is available on all popular podcast platforms, and we have our own apps for Apple and Android. Just head on over to AnfieldIndexPro.com and get started today.
Hello and welcome to the Mindfield podcast from Anfield Index Pro, your sports psychology podcast, where myself and Dr. Andrew Vincent sit down as often as we can and talk all things Liverpool Football Club and the mind. I'm your host, Alan O'Donoghue, and it is my pleasure to introduce you to Andrew Vincent. Andrew, how are you doing?
Well, you said it's your pleasure to introduce me, but literally right before the mics were going live, you were talking about how much you dislike talking to me. It's the only part of your life, actually, that you consider yourself unlucky for having to deal with is me. So an hour of bad luck coming your way. Well, maybe like 50 minutes because we burned some time down talking before.
I think I may have called you a prick before we started as well, but
you did. But I don't. For some reason, I felt like I might not be allowed to say that.
Well, look, we're like, and I don't like using Man United players, but we're like Teddy Sheringham and Andy Cole. Hated each other off the pitch, but as soon as they get on the pitch, it just clicked. So there you go.
There we go.
So how are you doing today?
I wasn't aware of that much animosity until just now, so I'll have to think about that while we go through this pod, which is actually perfect because our pod is sort of about animosity.
It is. So
you do that on purpose?
I did. I'm a genius that I come up with that on purpose. It definitely wasn't totally accidental.
Yeah, well, yeah, a podcasting genius indeed. You just got to listen to Mr. Hendricks over there on the other pods. One of the best around.
I'm not going to deny, like Dave knows his stuff, so I'm not going to argue with him.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we are going to talk about animosity, but in a kind of a roundabout way. So we've just come off the back of Manchester City 1, Liverpool 1. And while a lot of the other podcasts will talk about the content of the match and the goal and everything that comes with it, we're going to talk about Darwin v Pep. And we're going to talk about Darwin v Pep from the perspective of, is it the type of behaviour we should be encouraging as fans? And you brought this topic to me, Andrew, and I thought, yeah, there's definitely questions coming. But I'm curious, what sparked it initially for you?
It was listening to Jan Mulby and Trev Downey talk about this event unfold and on the one side, how much fun it is, right? And I don't know, I think let's start there. Full disclosure. We're going to talk about, is this a great thing to have or a great thing to encourage? But I enjoy stuff like that a lot. Really enjoy that part of the game. Hockey obviously is a sport that I mentioned at least once a podcast because it's one that I played. It's one that I work with. I was a big part of that stuff when I played. That was the kind of player I was. I liked that stuff a lot. I got a list of questions. Like I was going to record like a little video for a middle school class, which I guess would be what ages, like 10 to 12-year-olds, to watch just about sports psychology and mental health and stuff. And one of the questions on there was just kind of generally about trash talk and how to respond to it. And is it worth your time? And it was really hard for me to answer because there is some part of me that kind of feels like, yeah, it's part of it. It's fun. Like sport gives you an outlet to express things and behave in ways that you can't quite behave in the regular world. But then, of course, there is this problem, too, of how much of that then carries over to the regular world and how much of that becomes sort of caught up in this sort of violence or bravado and toughness. And how good is that really for us to be reinforcing or engaging in? And so, that's kind of what sparks this for me is like, I love moments like that. I find them so entertaining. And then also I have maybe a little bit of guilt around that and kind of wondering how good that is for us to really be fully behind.
Yeah. And when you brought the topic to me, I did start to think about it in that respect. And, I haven't watched a huge amount of hockey, but I've watched a fair amount of hockey documentaries, and especially I love those ones where, they're interviewing the guy whose job it was to go out basically and start the fight. And I remember watching one, and I can't remember who it was, but he was talking about how much he hated it, how much, like, he knew that was his role. He had to go out and start a fight with somebody. And, everyone was waiting for him to do it. His teammates were waiting. The refs were waiting for it. The fans were waiting for it. The media were waiting for it. And he said inside, he hated every single moment of it because he knew there was more to him than just being someone who gets into a fight. And I always found that a really striking image, and when I looked at Pep and I looked at Darwin, like we all love that little bit of needle and especially when you can stick it to City, it's always good. But something about it to me struck that I think Pep won because, well, for many different reasons, but it's one of those things where we as Liverpool fans and we as a club have a lot of the time kind of played up to this underdog or plucky, guys kind of up against the regime of Manchester United or Manchester City or Chelsea. And I wonder, is that something that actually holds us back? And is what happened with Darwin and Pep something that is a metaphor for that, in that we don't walk around swinging our Mickeys going, we're Liverpool Football Club. Does that make sense?
Walk me through how you see that playing out in that altercation. Because I think, I hear what you're saying, but I don't know how I see that in Darwin versus Pep.
So Darwin's the pup who actually hasn't achieved anything in the game. Pep is the master who has won everything. Has won everything as a player, won everything as a coach. And I wonder, was that him just letting Liverpool know, back in your box? It's kind of like when Scrappy-Doo from Scooby-Doo was like, let me at him. And they were holding him back. And it was just like, sit down, little puppy, sit down.
Yeah. I see that a little bit now. I hadn't thought about it at the time just because I was so entertained by the whole situation. To me, it was so unnecessary for Pep to even respond because of his status and stature. For him to get in an argument with a player is kind of ridiculous. Even with Klopp sometimes, when he is jawing back and forth with the player and the other team, that happens every once in a while. I think that's a little silly. I just think it's an adult and a kid going back and forth, which actually maybe plays into your point more than anything. Like, yeah, I don't know. I hadn't really thought much about who won.
And the other side of it is, it could be simply that Pep was just really pissed off that his team had the chances to win, and Darwin just wound him up, and he just responded.
Yeah.
So, and that could well be the truth. And maybe my explanation was something that was reading way too much into it. But in general, looking at that type of altercation, what do you think are the challenges or the downsides in terms of, viewers watching it, young people watching it? And is there a responsibility on players and coaches and, the sporting bodies to stamp that type of behavior out?
Yeah, I think I don't like combining those two questions, but they logically should be combined. I think the reason I don't like combining those two questions is because ultimately, like, I don't know that I want to watch a sport where those things are gone. But the first part of the answer to that question, like, of course it influences young people who are watching, or even adults who are watching, to be a little bit more violent or confrontational. And like the fact when those things get cheered, right? When those things get reinforced, it kind of makes us all feel like we want to go mix it up too. And I don't know if you feel like that. It just makes me feel like that, perhaps. But like, it just kind of reinforces this behavior of chirping at people and stirring things up and puffing our chests. And like, I think, ultimately, do I think that that's a good thing for people? Like, no, like I don't. I do think it's important to be able to stand up for yourself. I think it's important to not be totally timid all the time. Like, I do think that matters. But I think at the same time, it does, some of that stuff just kind of like encourages like a tribalism and violence to this that probably goes beyond what the real purpose of sport is.
And I think
which is like, yeah.
Go on.
Yeah, it just goes on beyond what the purpose of sport is. I don't know that I had more to say, but you were going to take it somewhere. So
I think you're absolutely right. And I think that probably is one of the biggest issues with football, especially. Like there's always going to be a certain amount of tribalism with any sport, but there's very few sports that I know of that it goes to the extreme lengths that football goes to. And like, I lived in the UK in the mid-90s, and while it wasn't the heyday of hooliganism of the 80s, hooliganism was definitely a part of it. So I would go to see matches, and I'd go to see, first division matches and championship matches and whatever, or Premier League matches, and there was fights, and there was organised fights, and I had friends who were involved in hooliganism, and they'd go and, they couldn't wait to go and start kicking lumps out of each other, and it's just something that I always found really weird. And even the chanting and singing of, disasters, and like, look, what's good about the Liverpool fan base now is that we are not accepting it and we are speaking up. But we can't ignore the fact that many Liverpool fans sing about Munich, and have sung about Munich over the years. So, like, I think it's... I remember a friend of mine, around about the time the Hillsborough inquiry finished, and the results came in, and it was found that the police were at fault, and the organisations were at fault as well. And this friend of mine, who's a United fan, went, "Thank fuck that's over," in a group chat. "Thank fuck that's over. Maybe this will stop the Scousers bleating." And I kind of went, Jesus Christ, where did that come from? And I responded and I said, I hope you and your family never experienced going to a match and not coming home, someone not coming home. And all the other United fans and other teams' fans in the group were like, man, that's bang out of order. Absolutely bang out of order. And what struck me was how people will accept behaviours, even in messages, not just violence, fighting with each other, but how people will accept behaviours based under the umbrella of football that would never be accepted across the board. And I like to look at rugby versus football. So in rugby, like, it's probably one of the most, if not the most brutal games in the world for, physical contact. You've guys 19, 20, 21 stone with no padding, literally ploughing into each other. And yes, they have their scuffles, but never is it onto the referee. Like, the referees have so much respect within that game that they have the authority to change reverse penalties, to, give people yellows and send them off into sin bins, or red cards if they're mouthing off at them. And like, the respect these huge people will give to a referee, and it doesn't spill over into the terraces. And yet fans can be unhappy at decisions. Fans can not like opposition players, but they'll still go and have a pint together after the match and have a bit of slagging and a bit of banter, but that's all it is. Whereas with football, for some reason, this explosiveness is just there. And I've experienced it in terms of, like, sitting in a pub in England and United fans, coming over and shouting and whatever, jeering at me in a Liverpool shirt. And my natural reaction is to go and get into a fist fight. And thankfully my brain kind of kicks in and goes, oh, this is like, they're slagging off a football team. It means nothing. Like, this literally means nothing. Is it worth you jumping into the middle of a gang of lads who will probably kick the living shit out of you over a game of football? And I know many people listening to this will go, no, it's more than football. But it's actually not. Mm-hmm. But yet the umbrella of football allows us, it's more accepted as part of the process than, in my experience, any other sport.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's an interesting comparison to rugby, which is such a physical and, like, even more violent sport. And to know that, like, the culture of that just involves less tribalism and, like, how that plays out. And I like, it's interesting, right? Like, these things, like, they do affect us. And it's like the same way, like, you can tell this story about, like, being in a pub and being like, gosh, I jump into the middle of this fist fight, or, like, I can certainly remember, like, I can remember being a kid growing up playing and watching hockey, where fighting that's a part of the sport, like, in a lot of ways, right? Like, there's levels where they're trying to cut it out, and there's there's places where it's more than a 5-minute penalty, it's a game misconduct or whatever. But, like, this idea of a code and defending your honor by getting into a fight was something that absolutely influenced my behavior. I can 100% remember different situations where, like, just playing a sport with my friends or whatever at 12, like, they would do something that bothered me and I'd be like, okay, cool. Like, we're fighting now. Like, hold this, right? And, like, talking about this to you as an adult, like, it was really stupid, pretty embarrassing, right? Like, I mean, like, whatever, he was him. And, like, ultimately my friends were like, what's wrong with you? Like, we didn't fight a lot, and partly because my best friend, who always was making me upset, was much smaller than me. So, like, that just wouldn't have gone well, ultimately, for either of us. I don't really want to beat him up, but, like, like, this kind of thing does affect the people who are watching, the young people who are watching, the adult people who are watching. And I think for that reason, like, we do have to be mindful. And, it's tough when you have something you really enjoy. or something that's like really fun. Like I think there's good versions of it, right? Like, and if you can have that where you can go play a sport and you're playing against another team and you can play hard and they can play hard, and maybe that includes some trash talk or someone being kind of a dick, and like that is what it is, and like, you know, by the end of the game everyone's fine and it doesn't spill over. Like, that's an ideal situation, right? And maybe that's how it is, right? Like Darwin and Pep, they get upset with each other, we have this little argument, neither of them really thinks twice about it again, it's no big deal, and like everyone moves on and forgets it. Like I don't see that as being a huge problem, except I don't really know that that's how that works and how that actually affects the people around it. And like, it's interesting, like you talked about refs too, and the animosity in football that's pointed towards refs. And like one of my, actually the same best friend who I wanted to beat up when I was a kid, like he's a referee now at like a pretty high level. And it makes me a little extra sensitive to just like the treatment of referees and some of the violence around referees in general. And like, you know, you hear stories coming out of different places of referees, them being assaulted at lower levels of the sport, right? Like a recreational level of the sport where some guy's probably getting paid $20, $30 to show up and, you know, referee these people as they're gasping for air for 30 minutes, right? Because like, and then, you know, that person gets assaulted or hurt or there's violence, and just how ridiculous that is. And like, you know, is that the upshot of Jose Mourinho chasing down the ref in the parking lot and making that seem like it's okay? Is that the upshot of players surrounding the refs on the field? Is that the upshot of some of our conversations about referees? And I mean, I'm baffled by how much, I'm going to say, like, fans of the Premier League, how much fans of the Premier League know about the referees and where they're from and like who their friends are and what teams they root for and what street they live on and stuff. It is incredible. Like, that is not a culture of referees that I've ever heard of in the United States. Like, I don't like that. Like, I don't even know the names of most of the refs. And actually, in a lot of sports, they made an effort. Like, there used to be names on the back of the referees' jerseys. They took those off, right? And so there'll be chants in the stadium of bullshit, and some that are actually much more violent in ways that are pretty gross. It's pretty common for there's a chant that was like basically talking about hanging refs, which was like that's pretty bad, right? So like that's certainly not to say that the culture around referees in the United States is much better. But I think like we have to be mindful of just like, what should this look like? And so the second part of your question that I still haven't answered, because I kind of said I didn't want to, is like, are we responsible for cutting this out or for stamping down on this? Or like, if there's a situation for like with Darwin and Pep, should I text my brother first thing and be like, fuck, I love Darwin? Right? Like, is that what my response should be? Or should I be shaking my head in disapproval? I'll tell you which one of those I did. It's the first one, you know? But like, I don't know that I have a good answer. That sport is in some ways a spectacle. And like, that's part of a spectacle, and emotions are going to spill over. So even that's not a big thing. But like, I think probably if I look at it honestly, finding ways to stamp out at least certain parts of it, or put more clarity around what's okay and what's not okay. You know, I think for a lot of us, if we're being really honest with ourselves, if we had a habit or a behavior that we knew we enjoyed, but the people around us could tell wasn't good for us and wasn't good for the people around us, we would hope that the people who had their heads on the right way would say to us, Andrew, you got to cut it out. This isn't good. And so I think if I'm trying to be the adult in the room of my brain.
Make holiday gatherings more delicious at Whole Foods Market. Whether you're the host or the guest who aims to impress, save now on baking essentials from 365 by Whole Foods Market. Need some extra help? Pick up crowd-pleasing flatbreads that are ready to heat, or build a lovely charcuterie board with sales on specialty cheeses and meats. Holiday wines and beers are also on sale, starting at $7.99. Host the perfect holiday party with Whole Foods Market. Must be 21 plus. Please drink responsibly.
Hey, this is Chuck the Goat from Goat USA. I wanted to break into your podcast and tell you about the new Goat USA store at Garden State Plaza. Check us out next to Seasons 52 across from Fogo de Chao. Be the goat by wearing the goat and gift your loved ones with the greatest apparel of all time. Heavenly soft and incredibly durable, Goat USA sweatshirts and joggers are the most outstanding gifts this holiday season. So come see us at Garden State Plaza. And if you don't know, you soon will. Goat USA. Apparel for kids and adults. Chuck out.
I don't need a VPN. I've got nothing to hide. This is what I used to tell myself before I hooked up with LibertyShield.com. Not only is my home internet now fully encrypted, but I can now access all the websites I want, whenever I want, and do so from absolutely anywhere. As a Liverpool fan, I love to know I can now watch every match, regardless of whether it's on UK TV or not. My Liberty Shield VPN makes sure nothing is blocked and guarantees me super fast streaming speed throughout that match. You can get connected right now with their software package, which includes a 48-hour no-obligation free trial and instant access to their apps for Apple, Android, Fire TV, PC, Mac and Android TV. Or go a step further like I have and get one of their pre-configured VPN routers. These small but powerful devices allow you to easily connect every device in your home to VPN, making it the perfect solution for smart TVs, Mac boxes, and games consoles. Visit LibertyShield.com today and use coupon code AIVPN25 to get 25% off at checkout.
Which I'm sure is challenging.
It is. There's not a lot of adults out there.
Yeah, and then there is the other side of the psychological use of sport for people to release pent-up energy, to release that pent-up, aggression or, animalistic, response inside us where, for some people, how we get a release of actual physical energy from our body is to hit something. And, the adrenaline spikes and then we shout and roar and that burns up that energy and then we can return back to our normal sense of self and our cognition starts to kick back in and our, what's that one? Prefrontal cortex. Is that the one?
Yeah. That's the adult up there.
It kicks back into gear and we're going, okay, now we can be rational and sensible. And there's a lot to be said for that side of things where we need to have that release. So Trent Alexander-Arnold scores on Sunday against Man City. And I jump up and I cheer, and my wife's cheering beside me. And I see the Man City fans behind Trent, and I give the middle finger to my television. Mm. And my wife looks at me and goes, "Are you actually for real?" You're giving the middle finger to an inanimate object. And she's absolutely right. But in that moment, that was me going, fuck you, Man City.
Right. I don't I'm not against you doing that. And I'm in my house doing similar things. And I don't know how much of a difference that makes. And I think for me, is it it's my 4-year-old son in the room while I'm doing that? Because in that case, I should be more mindful of it than often I'm in the basement. He's got the TV. He runs the show upstairs, basically. So it's I'm in the basement watching it. He's up there. So it's I can kind of do that and it's no big deal. But then I don't know. I really don't know. Part of me just feels like that's fine. That's part of it. It's part of the fun. That's part of what we're doing. But then also it is important to be mindful of the ripple effects of that.
Mm. And we, while we won't be our children's only role model, we will be the biggest role model that they have. And I think this comes back to the conversation starter. What we allow ourselves to say and do under the guise of football is not necessarily how we would conduct ourselves from a day-to-day perspective with the people around us or in work or with our relationships. But when it comes to football, it's I can say and do whatever I want, and that's all right. And my family have to put up with me being grumpy if my team hasn't won. And like, I know people who will honestly say that, you know, if Liverpool lose, they're in bad form for a week. And people have to put up with it because that's how I am. But it's not how you are. It's a choice that you're making because you're being driven by that part of your brain that's like, well, I'm a little child and I'm not happy, so everyone has to put up with it. And you might as well fold your arms and stamp your foot and go, it's not fair, about something that you have zero control over. And yes, we invest in it. Of course we invest in it. We all do. We love it. Like, me and you are sitting here spending our time for free to talk about Liverpool however often we do. And because we love it.
That's great.
And it's brilliant. And we'll put it out there and people will listen to it because they love it too. And that's just the way it is, which is great. And it helps us form friendships and relationships. But
as you're talking, one of the thoughts I have is like, I don't think we're all responsible for turning our noses up and not enjoying it or shaking our heads at it. But I think we are all responsible for being really honest about how it affects our behaviors, how our behaviors then affect the people around us, and having an honest thought about, is this good for me and is this good for the people around me? And, I think that's sports not an excuse to not really ask about that. Sports not an excuse to not reflect on that. I think, not to get too big picture with this, but here we go. Like, I also think like we live like in a time in the world where there's more permission to not reflect on your behaviors and take accountability for your behaviors than like I at least have seen. Like, I haven't been alive super long, but long enough to recognize that, hey, this feels different, to justify what we're doing without reflecting on it, without being honest with ourselves. I think that's one of the biggest things is, I think a lot of the behaviors people engage in different ways, if they're really honest with themselves at the end of the day, they'd be able to say like, no, this isn't how I want to be. And I think a lot of those people who spend the week being furious about Liverpool, if they really looked and they said to themselves, well, on a Saturday morning, and that's what it is actually for Liverpool most of the time, but really and truly, like genuinely for me, like the kickoffs, it makes it a 7:30 a.m. kickoff. It's actually super convenient for my schedule. So like, doesn't bother me. I love it. You watch the game first thing, like we have nothing going on. Nothing's going to be scheduled during that time slot. I'm all in favor of the 12:30 kickoff or whatever it is for all of you. But I think if you were to look at that and you say, okay, so at 7:30 in the morning, Liverpool lose. And as of 9:30 on Saturday, you are going to be impossible to be around for the next 7 days. That includes the rest of the weekend. It means your kids aren't going to want to really be around you. Your kids want to leave you alone instead of coming up and saying, hey, do you want to play? Do you want to do this? It means your wife might not want to be around you. It means whatever events you have scheduled, like people aren't going to approach you or you're not going to be able to enjoy those. Is that okay with you? Is that what you want for yourself? And my guess is that a lot of people would say, no. It's not actually what I want for myself. And I think we are responsible for asking ourselves those questions, and like, I don't know. So like for a little bit was playing adult hockey with my dad, and my dad's, 30 years older than me. So I was probably around 25 and he's 55 then. So we were playing with like a decent range, right? Like there were some other younger guys out there who are like in their 20s and late 20s, but there's also like a fair number of guys who were 45, 50, 55, 60 and like, out there having fun. And, there was a moment where it's hockey. So it's like in front of the net. And that's kind of like the opposite of in the box in soccer where everything gets called a little more harshly. It's like when you're battling for space in front of the net, it's kind of like whatever happens. Like there's much looser calls there. Like you can hold and you can slash. And so that was when I actually played at a younger level. That was a place where I got away with a lot. We'll put it like that. And so I'm saying the person who was like, I think covering couldn't have been older than 30, but so it's like we're a similar age. And so it's like, we're kind of battling in front of the net. It was all fine. Then he goes to skate away. And like, once I realized the play's gone the other way and no one's looking, I give him like a nice chop with my stick on the ankle. It was just instinctual, right? Like, that's just something I would have done all the time, which like, I could see Al cringing if you could see Al cringing, but that's part of the game. Like, I've gotten chops on my ankle. That's something that happens. And he turned around and I just immediately was like, I'm so sorry. Like, that was really ridiculous. And I like in that moment was so embarrassed. It's like, we're in this adult hockey game. And that was just an instinct, right? That was just a thing that I've done 100 times that like, you're seeing a whole different side of me right now, aren't you?
Yeah.
But like, that's something I've done 100 times that like this person didn't need that. This is so stupid. Like, we're out here to have fun. There's no reason to hurt anybody. And like, I think I had to be really honest with myself then about like, how do I want to engage with this? Because this kid was 20, but if that was a 60-year-old, would I have still done that instinctually? Maybe. Would I have felt worse about it? Yes. And like, I got to get a handle on myself, you know? And I think that being honest with yourself in that moment of like, you can have fun here and you can play in these games, but like, you need to be more on top of how this plays out.
Mm.
To tell you the end of the story, my dad and I actually both ended up getting kicked out of the game at the end.
No way.
We were both excused early by a referee who was my hockey coach when I was a kid. So it was...
you couldn't write it.
You couldn't. And to be honest, that wasn't our fault. But it was the person who I had chopped in the ankle earlier who then... took a shot at my dad, who I took a shot at him. And then when my dad got up, went back after him. And then there was the whole thing. And then we were asked to go home. And so that's also like, is that something that's kind of funny? And to be honest, did my dad and I sort of enjoy that when we were both the only ones in the locker room getting changed? A little bit, right? Like, it was sort of fun. And it's not like afterwards that guy came and found us and like we had a fight in the parking lot. Like, I think whatever, like it was fine. But like at the same time, was that a good moment? No. Right? Like, that's not what anyone is there for. And if someone had gotten hurt in that whole thing, would we have felt pretty stupid? Yeah, we would have felt really stupid. And so I think like, I think I've just gone on like a random detour into my like adult hockey career here, right? Which is pretty pathetic, but also like, I think illustrates this point of like, parts of this are really fun and I don't want to lose those. But at the same time, like being really honest about what parts of that are okay and how are those actually affecting people does seem important and like the bare minimum we can do.
Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Dr. Andrew Vincent.
Andrew, sport psychologist.
Andrew Chopper Vincent. Yeah. And look, you know, if we take a backward step and look at this, what happened with Pep and Darwin is nothing. It's nothing.
Yeah.
And we've just created a 40-minute podcast discussing, using it as the background for this conversation. But I do think the conversation is worthwhile having. You know, the conditions were ripe for the two lads to have a bit of a disagreement. And we don't know what was said and who said what. But, you know, Darwin had missed a few chances. Pep had seen his team miss some chances. And, you know, it finished in a draw, which didn't really suit either, but did suit both. And nothing bad happened. They just exchanged words. That was it. Nothing more, nothing less. But this conversation, I do think, is important for us all to reflect on ourselves and what we allow ourselves to do or say or react versus would we do this on a day-to-day basis in the real world? And maybe we would. And we're not condemning anybody. We're not saying that anyone's right or wrong. We're just posing the question. Is this how you, you know, do we want, you know, at our funeral, our kids stand up going, oh, dad was a great fella or mum was a great one, but fuck me, when it came to watching the football, we hated it because they were grumpy as shit afterwards if it didn't go their way. Maybe all of us will go, Yeah, that's exactly what I once said on my funeral day. Maybe some other of us might go, no.
Yeah, see, I thought you were going to go a different way with that and say at your funeral, do you really want your kids to be like, yeah, wasn't allowed to play adult hockey, just couldn't handle myself. So I thank you for sparing me, because I'm not sure I deserved it at the moment. But I think those are really important questions to ask. And I'm glad you mentioned it, because like I don't want this pod to seem like we're sitting here being like, how dare they argue with each other? Right? Or like, how dare Pep and Darwin have words, or how dare anyone enjoy that? Or that's so beneath us. Like that's not where we're coming from at all. And that's part of why I tell that hockey story. Like I don't want anyone to feel like I'm poo-pooing them for having this different reaction, right? Like I'm clearly have a disposition towards being a loose cannon, which is how I ended up in the job that I'm doing right now. Is like, I recognize the need to rectify it. But I think the question is really important, and like to be able to ask ourselves, because like I think it's true, and like I know it's because I have a friend who's a ref that I hear those things really differently when some of those conversations take place, or when like the violence is threatened, or when there's like different whatever. Like I do hear those things really differently, and so that's often a situation where I'm just like, if that was someone talking about my friend like this, I'd be pretty pissed about it. I wouldn't think it was okay. I know he's gotten text messages from random staff of random teams later, or Instagram messages that are just like, oh, like, fuck you, your red card got overturned or whatever. And it's like, he's forgotten about it. Right? It's like, he was just doing his best. Like, I know that for a fact. And so like, on the one hand, like, did that bother him a lot? Like, no, like he knows it's part of it. He's kind of used to that sort of thing, unfortunately. But on the other side of things, like if you had someone randomly pop up on your Instagram or your social media to just say something disparaging to you, or just to say something like, to get in that one last shot, like it feels like a bit of an invasion of privacy, right? This is someone entering your personal life. And I think for most of us, if we had someone from a work context entering our private lives to continue some sort of feud from a work context, that would feel like a bit of an invasion, especially if it's not someone you knew or had a personal thing with. It's just someone who's letting you know, I can enter your private life and continue to poke you. And that bothers me a lot. Like that's, of course, a place where it's not okay. And is that different from yelling something from the stands? Or yeah, I think so. Mm-hmm. I mean, I love WWE. I haven't watched it in a long time, but like there was a while where my brother and I got really into it. I love those shows because you can just go and boo and just like fucking go, you suck, boo. And like, that's part of it, right? The person there, they're a heel. They want you to boo. That's the whole thing. And like, there's something about that is so much fun. Right. But then again, I also remember I brought my brother to it. I was probably like 18 or 19. He was probably 13. We were stuck in the parking lot because these two guys were screaming at each other. It's like, so we're sitting there in this car while these two grown men have some testosterone fueled argument about God knows what in the parking lot because they just spent the last 2 hours watching violence. And so now, at 18, you feel like you're an adult, but you're not. And like the two of us are sitting there, and I'm positive my brother's scared. He was 12, 13. Yeah. And I'm kind of like, oh shit, like what if this goes really badly? And I think it's hard to separate those two things. Like you have to look at both at the same time. Even like that was so much fun. I still am planning on going back to more of those shows because they are a lot of fun. But then there's probably certain people who, if they're being honest with themselves, need to be able to say, this isn't for me.
Absolutely. And I'll be honest, I've always been quite a calm person. I don't really like getting into confrontation, but put me on a football pitch and I'll happily run through you to get the ball. And I've had red cards over the years, and that was my place to actually just let it all out. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, it has its place.
Yeah. And I'll tell you what, like, interestingly, if we'll go more into my origin story and the reality of probably why I ended up in sports psychology, if you were to go back and watch me playing hockey as a young person, I was doing things that weren't okay. My anger was out of control. And the way that was expressed was not ultimately appropriate. Mm-hmm. And someone should have sat me down and said, like, look, this is a problem. and that never really happened. My mom had her moments where she was like, you got to get this sorted out. Like, we got to send you somewhere. This is ridiculous. Not like away, but like, to a therapist, to someone like me, which ultimately I wish that I had someone to both say like, hey, you're allowed to be aggressive. You're allowed to enjoy this. You can have those moments of release, but also like, you got to hold yourself accountable for some of these things, and you got to get a handle on what you feel and find some other ways to manage that aren't as aggressive and not as ridiculous. Because there were probably times where actually I looked really stupid and out of control. And that's something that I've been able to do in my work since, is like, not so much on the professional athlete side, like they usually are in better control, but on the youth athlete side, having those moments of being able to help people recognize like the amount of anger you're having and the amount of emotion you're feeling is something you need to work on and figure out for yourself. Like you're hurting, right? You're struggling. And like, that's part of what's coming out in this intensity here. It's not just a healthy aggression of you enjoying this. This is like a problem. And, I've been able to see a lot of young people really grow through that in ways that are really impressive, of being able to recognize like, yeah, that's true. And just like kind of that lift that guise of sport, which makes them feel like it's okay to be like this and be able to say, this isn't really how I want to be. And like, actually, I can approach my sport really differently. I can hold myself accountable in my sport really differently. I don't need to use this as an excuse for being this way. And it's always really impressive to see them grow.
It's a maturity process. But if they can do that maturity process, that can be accelerated, having them working with an appropriate person. So this has been a fun ride, Andrew. And I want to say thanks for bringing the topic to the floor. So, final question for you. Should we encourage Darwin?
No. Partly because I don't think we need to. I think he's going to do it anyway. I think that we should ask ourselves honestly how things like that affect us and how we take away from those. And are we able to enjoy those and have some fun with those without turning around and then going to try and intimidate someone in our own life? And if Darwin yelling at Pep causes you to cause a scene in a parking lot, or like if that energy is something you bring with you, and then, whatever, like you got to be mindful of that. And so we should at least say that. If you can't see a ruckus on the pitch without bringing a ruckus into your life, you got to be honest with yourself.
Brilliant. Andrew, thank you so much for your contribution today. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be, which is always nice.
It's always nice when talking to me is bearable.
Exactly.
Like that's, if I can hit bearable for 45 minutes, then I'm
I always say to every young person that I work with at the end of the first session, was this the worst thing in the world? And they usually say no. And I say, that's grand. I always aim for at least the second worst thing. So as long as it's not the worst, that's okay.
Usually my clients say yes. Is that a problem? No.
They're just afraid that you're going to hit them with his hockey stick. But thanks so much, Andrew. Listeners, thank you also for your ears. We really, really appreciate it. And like Dublin Bus, you might not see us for a while, but then you get 2 in a row pretty quick in a short space of time. So hopefully we'll be back again very, very soon on Anfield Index Pro. Until next time, take care of yourselves.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this Anfield Index show. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel so future podcasts find their way to your device automatically. There's nothing quite like fan engagement, and we'd love to know what you think of anything discussed on this show. The best way to get in touch is over on our free Discord community, where both podcasters and listeners debate the hottest LFC topics 24/7. Sign up free now at AnfieldIndex.com/Discord. You won't regret it. You can also follow us on Twitter at Anfield Index and find us on Facebook by searching for Anfield Index. Oh, and before you go, we'd love it if you could leave us a 5-star review on your favourite podcast app. It only takes a couple of seconds, and it means the world to the people who create these free shows.
Sports Social Podcast Network.